Greetings, friends around the world. This is Dr. Bob Thiel for the Bible News Prophecy Channel. I want to speak today about China and the kings of the East and tie that in to something that actually happened on March 17th, 2018. On that date, the National People's Congress of China voted 2,770 to none, and there's only 2,770 people in it. They reappointed President Xi Jinping to be president again, except this time without any limits, term limits, so he can serve indefinitely. Now, the Chinese government defended this move, saying, hey, this will help stability, he's fighting corruption, he's helping our people. And while in many other societies people worry about such things, and I'm sure there's some in China who probably have some concerns about it, in a sense, having a long-term leader is not necessarily a negative, because hopefully they are looking for the long-term interest of their people. Of course, permanent leaders can also have other issues. Sometimes their ego, pride, and power gets to their head. But that's not what I want to talk about here. What I want to talk about is the fact that when this was proposed, and has now become the case, someone wrote me and said, hey, could the Chinese president Xi Jinping actually become one of the prophesied kings of the East of the book of Revelation? Well, let's go to Revelation chapter 16. I'm going to start reading in verse 12, and I'm going to be reading from New King James Version of the Bible. Then the sixth angel poured out his bowl on the great river Euphrates, and its water was dried up, so that the way of the kings from the east might be prepared. And I saw three unclean spirits, like frogs, coming out of the mouth of the dragon, out of the mouth of the beast, out of the mouth of the false prophet. For they are spirits of demons, performing signs, which go out to the kings of the earth and of the whole world, to gather them to the battle of that great day of God Almighty. Behold, I am coming as a thief. Blessed he who watches and keeps his garments, lest he walk naked and they see his shame. So they gathered them together to the place in Hebrew called Armageddon. So we see kings coming from the east. So it's more than one country. And they need to cross over the Euphrates. Now, if Xi Jinping remains in power long enough, he very well could or would be one of the kings of the east. Perhaps I should mention that the term kings of the east also can be translated kings of the sunrise. The Berean literal Bible calls them kings of the rising sun. The Douay-Rheims Bible says kings from the rising of the sun. And so we've got a prophecy about people coming from the Far East. And this would seemingly need to include China. Now, for additional connections to China, let's go to Revelation chapter 9. I'd like to read verses 13 through 18. And the sixth angel sounded, and I heard a voice from the four horns of the golden altar, which is before God, saying to the sixth angel who had the trumpet, release the four angels who are bound at the great river Euphrates. So let me pause here. So we see another time, sixth angel, we also see the Euphrates mentioned again, some connection to what we read before in Revelation 16. Now continuing, verse 15. So the four angels who had been prepared for the hour and the day and the month and the year were released to kill a third of mankind. Now the number of the army of the horsemen was 200 million. I heard the number of them, and thus I saw the horses in the vision. Those who sat on them had breastplates of fiery red, hyacinth blue, and sulfur yellow. The heads of the horses were like the heads of lions, and out of their mouth came fire, smoke, and brimstone. By these three plagues, a third of mankind was killed, by the fire and the smoke and the brimstone which came out of their mouths. Now only China, or possibly India, could field an army this big. Now I believe this will be a multinational army, an international army, and will include people from China, as well as probably India, Pakistan, Indonesia, Korea, Japan. There'll be a pretty big army from there. When I was reading about the colors that the army has, these colors are similar to some that the Chinese army use. I'm not going to dwell on that. But when we look at Revelation 9, Revelation 16, pretty certain that China is going to be one of the kings of the earth. Now, this is a battle that is not World War III, by the way. A lot of people think, well, Armageddon is World War III. Well, that's more like World War IV or V. World War III will be a battle where a European power, predominantly European with some international assistance, will destroy the Anglo-American peoples. This would be the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. There's other prophecies that seem to involve China that I'd like to talk about just briefly here. I want to go to the book of Isaiah. It's in the Old Testament. Isaiah 46, I want to read verse 11. Calling a bird of prey from the east, the man who executes my counsel from a far country. Indeed, I have spoken it. I will bring it to pass. I have purposed it. I will also do it. So we have another prophecy about some type of, sounds like army, bird of prey army from the east. Now let's go to Isaiah 13, starting in verse 4. The noise of a multitude in the mountains, like that of many peoples, a tumultuous noise of the kingdoms of nations gathered together. The Eternal of hosts musters the army for battle. They come from a far country, from the end of heaven. The Eternal has weapons of indignation to destroy the whole land. Wail, for the day of the Eternal, or the day of the Lord is at hand. It will come as destruction from the Almighty. Therefore, all hands will be limp, every man's heart will melt, and they will be afraid. Pangs and sorrows will take hold of them. They will be in pain as a woman in childbirth. They will be amazed at one another. Behold, the day of the Lord comes, cruel, with both wrath and fierce anger, to lay the land desolate, and he will destroy sinners from it. And we see about this having to do with tying this in with Armageddon. I should also probably mention that I also consider that Taiwan will be one of the kings of the East, whether United States China before then or at that stage. And I also would like to mention, when we talk about Armageddon, in the 21st century, last year or two or so, we've been hearing about China's One Belt, One Road project, also called the Silk Road project, which I believe is going to help pave some of the roads and some of the ways to get to Armageddon. Now, there's some other passages that I believe involve the Chinese in the time of the end. I want to go to the book of Daniel, Daniel chapter 11. I'll start in verse 40. Now, I'm not going to read everything that's got to do with China at the end, but this one I think you'll find of why it ties in here. It says, at the time of the end, the king of the south shall attack him, and the king of the north shall come against him with a whirlwind, with chariots, horsemen, with many ships, and he shall enter the countries, overwhelm them, and pass through. So the reason I read that is so we're seeing something about a power called the king of the north. That's a European power. Now let's cut down to verse 44, see what happens to that European power. But news from the east and the north shall trouble him. Therefore he shall go out with a great fury to destroy and annihilate many. He shall plant his tents of his palace between the seas and the glorious holy mountain, yet he shall come to his end, and no one will help him. So we see destruction coming, and fear coming from the king of the north. One of the reasons the king of the north cannot be Russia is there's no power north of Russia. No great power, anyway. But to a sense, Europe, when you look at Europe, Russia would be a power to the north and the east, and China, of course, is to the east. Now let's go to Jeremiah chapter 50. I'm going to read verse 9, and then I'll go to another part of Jeremiah 50. For behold, I will raise and cause to come up against Babylon an assembly of great nations from the north country. And they shall array themselves against her. From there she shall be captured. Their arrows shall be like those of an expert warrior. None shall return in vain. So you notice these are called great nations. This would include China as a great nation. And it's going to be a battle against the end-time Babylon, which the king of the north will be the leader of. Now let's drop down to verse 41 of Jeremiah chapter 50. Behold, a people shall come from the north, and a great nation and many kings shall be raised from the ends of the earth. They shall hold the bow and the lance. They are cruel and shall not show mercy. Their voice shall roar like the sea. They shall ride on horses, set array like a man for battle against you, O daughter of Babylon. So this is not the old Babylon. This is the daughter of Babylon. There's some people who think this has got to do with the actual ancient city of Babylon that is in Iraq. This is the daughter of Babylon. Now let's go to verse 43. The king of Babylon has heard the report about them, and his hand grow feeble. Anguish has taken hold of him, pangs as of a woman in childbirth. So we see kings from the north and from the east. And this ties in these pangs of childbirth to what we read earlier in Isaiah. The Bible is clear that one day the European power, which will destroy not only the Anglo-Saxon peoples, Anglo-American peoples, but also many of the Muslim peoples, etc. This is going to happen. But they will get destroyed someday. But that will not be for several years from now, at least 7 years from now. Now, war is not the ultimate destiny for the Chinese or the Europeans. Deification is. Many people do not understand that God will offer salvation to all. I'd like to read a couple of passages about that many people seem to have overlooked. Luke chapter 3 verse 6 says, "All flesh shall see the salvation of God." Now some people think, well, that means after people are resurrected, they'll see Jesus. Well, I think it's more than that, because they won't have that's just seeing Jesus isn't necessarily an offer of salvation. This is also prophesied in the Old Testament, Isaiah chapter 52, verse 10. "And all the ends of the earth shall see the salvation of our God." Are they only going to see it, or will they do something about it? I want to read something that Jesus said in the book of Luke. Luke chapter 13. Starting in verse 29. "They shall come from the east and the west, from the north and the south, and sit down in the kingdom of God. Indeed, there are those who will be last will be first, first who will be last." Now those from the east and north would include Asians like the Chinese. The south would include Africa, Latin America, and many islands. And yes, there's going to be some from the west as well. But the people in the west are no more prominent than people from the north, south, or east. Various ones who have their own views on Christianity, if you look at the way they've got it, it's almost a prejudicial religion, because it's mostly people from the west they think are going to be saved. And we see this, it says north, south, east, and west. So the west are not predominant. Anyway, God has a plan to offer salvation to all who ever lived, either in this age or the age to come. This includes the Chinese, whether or not its current president, Xi Jinping, will be an actual king of the East or not. The reality is, China is prophesied as to be a great nation and a king of the East, and it will be involved in end-time biblical prophecies. And steps its current leader is taking likely will have something to impact that. You can believe the Bible. We're seeing events line up for the end times, including China's Silk Road project that I mentioned before. This is Dr. Bob Thiel for the Bible News Prophecy Channel.